What's up YouTube, Josh Bacon here, also known as JB the Car Fanatic. Now, I have been on YouTube for nearly 3 years now, and in that time you guys have known an awful lot about me. I like cars, I like playing Forza, and I also like the Now That's What I Call Music compilation series. Like this one. And this one. And this one. And all these as well. But in all that time, there is one thing you guys have never known about me until now, and I'll give you 10 seconds to guess what that something is. Have you guessed what it is yet? Well, I'll tell you. It's that when I was younger, I was afraid of being locked in my parents' cars because they all had burglar alarms on them, and more often than not, most of them had volumetric interior protection, which is where this fear came from. This meant I was quite scared about them going off if I was waiting in the car with the doors locked. So in this video, I'll tell you the story of my fear of being locked in my parents' cars due to most of them having alarm systems with interior protection. It all started with the Vauxhall Frontera my dad had back then. When I was about 9 years old, my mum was driving me to school in it. And on the way, she needed to quickly pop into the co-op to get something, and she locked the doors and left me alone. Now, the first time I was left on my own in the Frontera with the doors locked and the alarm armed, I somehow managed to not trigger the alarm while Mum was gone. But this time, I wasn't so lucky, because while I was waiting for Mum to come back, guess what happened? The alarm went off because the alarm had volumetric interior protection in the form of 2 ultrasonic sensors mounted on the passenger side B pillar. They were picking up every movement I made inside the car, and at one point the sensors picked up my movement and triggered the alarm. I quickly covered my ears as hard as I could to drown out the alarm while it was blaring away, until Mum silenced the alarm by simply unlocking the car. After that, I was unsure if I would ever be able to wait in a car that had volumetric interior protection as part of its alarm system. Later in the year, in July 2010, when I was 10 years old, my dad sold the Frontera and bought a 2002 Jeep Grand Cherokee Limited with the 4.7 litre petrol V8. Now, I know the one in this image isn't the one we had. Admittedly, it's not the exact one we had. The Grand Cherokee in this image is actually a 2003 model. The one we had was a 2002. And the one in the image has the 4 litre straight 6, whereas we have the 4.7 litre petrol V8. But apart from the model year and the engine, this one is practically identical to the one we had. And naturally, being a higher specification of Grand Cherokee, it too had an alarm system with volumetric interior protection provided by 2 ultrasonic sensors, but this time the sensors were mounted on the roofliner inside the car. On the way back home, I went with my dad in the Jeep, but I knew Dad would have to stop for fuel, and if he did, I knew he would lock the doors and leave me on my own, while he went in to pay for the fuel, and I would accidentally trigger the alarm and it would scare the living daylights out of me. So I was constantly looking at the gauge on the top right, thinking it was the fuel gauge, knowing that the closer the needle was to the max, the less chance that Dad would have to stop the fuel on the way back. But then, while Dad was on the phone to Mum, he then announced that he was going to stop for petrol on the way back, which he would be doing a lot, given the V8's catastrophic fuel consumption and huge thirst for petrol. The claimed fuel economy figures were just 17 miles to the gallon. Well, from the moment he said that he would be stopping for petrol, that was when my anxiety levels went up a lot. Because as I said earlier, I knew he would lock the doors and leave me on my own while he went in the shop to pay for the fuel, and I also knew that while he was gone I would accidentally trigger the alarm and it would scare the living daylights out of me. Also, it was at this point that I realised the gauge I was looking at, which I thought was the fuel gauge, wasn't actually the fuel gauge at all. It was actually the oil pressure gauge. The fuel gauge was actually on the bottom left. And I definitely didn't want a repeat of what happened when I was left alone in the Frontera and its alarm went off. So while Dad was filling up with petrol, I asked Dad if the Jeep had an alarm, to which he replied that it didn't have one. But I didn't believe him at all. I knew already that because the one he bought was a higher specification model, it did have an alarm anyway. In the end, I decided to come into the shop with Dad to pay for the fuel because I was just so worried about the alarm going off while I was waiting in the car while he was gone. Not only that, but later that same month, when Mum was about to take us to school in the Jeep, when we opened the doors to get in the car, the alarm actually went off and it really scared the living daylights out of me. And about a month after we went on a caravan holiday in it at the Haven Wild Duck Holiday Park in August 2010, my dad sold the Jeep and bought a 2005 Land Rover Discovery 3 HSE in September of the same year. Yes, I know the one in this image is not the exact one we had, because this one probably has a black leather interior in it, whereas the Discovery 3 we had a cream leather interior, but apart from the colour of the interior, this one is practically identical to the one we had. Being the range-topping HSE specification, it came with pretty much all the bells and whistles you could have on a Discovery 3 at the time, along with some features we'd never had on any of the cars we'd owned in the past before, like heated rear seats, air suspension, tri-zone climate control, and rear audio controls in the back, just to name a few. And guess what? It too, unsurprisingly, had a burglar alarm with volumetric interior protection provided by 4 ultrasonic sensors which were originally mounted on the roofliner of the car, as you can see here. But at some point after it was first registered in September 2005 and before we bought it, the car had a Rosen roof-mounted drop-down DVD player fitted in the past, and so both the controls for the aircon in the back and the interior sensors for the alarm system were repositioned within the DVD player housing. Now, I actually liked how neatly the aircon controls for the second row and the motion sensors for the alarm were integrated into the housing for the DVD player unit when it was fitted, as you can see here. But sadly, that still didn't change the fact that when we were taking the Discovery, every time my parents would mention that they would be stopping for fuel or stopping somewhere where waiting in the car would normally be an option for me if we were taking my mum's Vauxhall Zafira that she had back then, my anxiety levels would skyrocket because I was just so scared about the alarm going off while I was waiting in the car. So when they left, I would specifically ask them to not lock the doors while they were gone. That way, I wouldn't have to worry about the alarm going off when they were gone. However, that still hasn't stopped me from having a couple of close calls where I was actually locked inside the Discovery, but luckily on both occasions they were only for a brief moment. The first one was in January 2011 in the car park at Bassett Law Hospital, when we went to visit my mum in hospital. While I was waiting in the Discovery with my sister, the doors unexpectedly locked themselves shut. As you would imagine, this really scared the living bejesus out of me, and I really started panicking. A lot. The doors were then quickly unlocked, and my heart was racing like mad after what had just happened. The second one was in February 2011, when we were in the car park of our local Isuzu dealer, looking at an Isuzu Rodeo pickup. While I was waiting in the car on my own for Mum and Dad to come back, the doors locked and it really scared me to death. I even remember how tightly I gripped onto the door in fear, and then I tried pulling at the door locks to try and unlock the doors before the alarm had set. But then the doors were quickly unlocked. After what had just happened when the doors were locked, my heart was again racing like crazy. Fortunately, in both cases, the alarm didn't go off. While the Disco was a pretty good car to own, I certainly thought it was a good car to own because I thought it was very comfortable. Unfortunately, it wasn't without its faults, because since we were experiencing problems over the ownership period with the air suspension and the windscreen, these Discoveries are very complex cars, it proved to be too problematic and unreliable to justify keeping it for longer, as these Discoveries can often become endless money pits as they age. So my dad sold the Discovery, and in March 2011, he bought a brand spanking new 2011 Isuzu Rodeo Denver Max Plus pickup truck. Yes, this time the one in the picture is actually the exact one we had. I found it on my old Nintendo DSi XL, actually. Okay, so admittedly, it didn't have as much equipment as the Discovery had. It had no air suspension, no tri-zone climate control, no rear audio controls in the back, no DVD screens in the back either. But then, that meant there was less stuff to go wrong in the long run. But although we didn't really keep it for long enough for me to give proper thoughts on the reliability, I assumed that because it was Japanese and it was built in Thailand, had we kept it for a longer period of time, maybe about 2 or 3 years instead of the 11 months we'd kept it for, it would have been a whole lot more reliable than the Discovery. But, like the Jeep and Discovery, it too had an alarm. And I specifically remember on 2nd of April 2011, we returned home in the Isuzu from putting some flowers on my now deceased Nan's grave to show that we still had respect and love for her, since she died in October 2010. Unfortunately, when I went to pick up my Nintendo 3DS off the floor, the doors unexpectedly locked themselves shut and the alarm was armed, ready to start going off at any moment. I was frozen with fear as I waited for the doors to unlock, and I was as steady and as still as a rock so as to not trigger the alarm. But then, the alarm went off anyway, and boy did it scare the living bejesus out of me. I covered my ears as hard as I possibly could to drown it out. But the alarm was then quickly silenced, and I suddenly thought to myself, thank God that's over. The problem was eventually traced back to Mum pushing the button side of the key against the rim of the steering wheel when she looked at me and my sister to check on us, activating the lock button on the key, which then locked the doors. In fact, I actually remember when my fear got so bad with the Isuzu, when we were setting off for Skegness in the Isuzu to stay there for a couple of days on the 30th of May 2011, about a month before I turned 11. My mum actually let me sit in the front, and she would sit in the back where I used to sit, because she thought that I might be quite scared about the alarm going off. But do you want to know what the really crazy thing about all this was? Unlike the Jeep and the Discovery, the Isuzu didn't even have volumetric interior protection as part of its alarm system like the Jeep and Discovery did, only parametric. Or at least I don't think it had volumetric interior protection. You see, I was also scared of being locked in the Jeep and Discovery when we had them for fear of their alarms going off, because in addition to the usual parametric protection, they both have volumetric interior protection in the form of ultrasonic sensors mounted inside the car. So at least with the Jeep and Discovery, there was at least something to justify why I was so scared about the alarm going off while I was waiting in the car when we had them. But the Isuzu, as I mentioned earlier, didn't have those ultrasonic interior sensors, or at least I don't think it had them. But even then, I was still completely terrified of the alarm going off while I waited for Mum and Dad to come back. Not that it would have gone off anyway without that volumetric protection picking up every single little movement I made inside the car. After just 11 months of ownership, Dad sold the Isuzu and bought a 2006 Mitsubishi Shogun short wheelbase, which he owned for just 20 days, which I think I'm right in saying is the shortest length of time we've ever owned a car. He then part exchanged that in March 2012 for a 2009 Vauxhall Insignia Sports Tourer CDTI. Yes, Sports Tourer is what they call the estate version of the Insignia, and it was in range-topping elite nav specification with all the bells and whistles. Dual-zone climate control, heated leather seats, HID headlights, colour sat-nav, powered tailgate, the lot. Naturally, because it was a high specification, like the Jeep, Discovery and Isuzu, it had an alarm system. But unlike the Isuzu, in addition to the usual parametric protection, it also had volumetric interior protection as well, thanks to two ultrasonic sensors mounted in the front of the car on the roof, just in front of the front courtesy lights, as you can see here. Unfortunately, those ultrasonic sensors also meant that whenever we needed to stop somewhere where waiting in the car would normally be an option for me, if we were taking my mum's Hyundai Santa Fe, for example, the shops. The Asda supermarket store at Celtic Point Retail Park in Worksop is actually a good example of this. With the Insignia, I had no choice but to come in with them. Why? Well, because of these sensors, I was scared that if I were to wait in the car for them to come back, not that I would have wanted to if we were taking the Insignia, obviously, if the doors were locked, the alarm would go off while I was waiting for them to come back, due to the sensors picking up every little movement I made inside the car. So at least this time with the Insignia, there was something to justify why I was so scared about the alarm going off while I was waiting in the car. As a matter of fact, I specifically remember on 24th of October 2013, when I was 13 years old, when we had just parked up at Asda supermarket in Celtic Point Retail Park and we were getting out the car, I overheard my mum telling my sister that I didn't like staying in my dad's car because of this. And it wasn't just when we were at the shops either. On 8th of March 2014, we set off for Sheffield in the Insignia, possibly to visit my grandparents or go to McDonald's there. I think I might have forgotten where we went that day, to be honest, but it was either to go to McDonald's there or visit Grandma and Grandad at their house. I don't really know anymore. It's been 5 years. Yeah. But either way, it was either to visit Grandma and Grandad or go to McDonald's there, like I said earlier. Anyway, after I got in the car with my sister, whilst Mum was making final preparations for the journey, my sister closed her door like normal. But because I was worried about the alarm going off unexpectedly, I stopped my door from closing all the way using my elbow. But while my door was being held open, my sister was wondering why I was holding it open and not closing it fully like she did with her door. At this point, I should explain that this was because at some point before we went, I had this vision that while the car was unlocked, the alarm light on top of the dashboard was blinking, implying the alarm was armed, even though the car was unlocked. And it was this vision that led me to believe that the alarm set when the doors were closed, even if the car was unlocked, even though the car's alarm wouldn't have been programmed this way in real life anyway. And that's why I was holding my door open with my elbow while Mum was still in the house. This was the point Mum was trying to make to my sister when she got in the car, and explained to her why it wasn't until she got back to the car that I fully closed my door, because I thought the alarm would fully set with the door closed, even if the car was unlocked, and as I mentioned earlier, this was despite the fact that the car's alarm wouldn't have been programmed this way in real life anyway. Now, fast forward to 2019, and I'm now capable of staying in a car with an alarm system without having the bejesus scared out of me when it goes off. Okay, so in May 2019 we traded in our older Hyundai Santa Fe at our local Hyundai dealer for a 2015 Santa Fe Premium SE, which is basically a newer model of the car we had before. And my dad now has a Ford Transit work van. none of which have volumetric interior protection as part of their alarms, only parametric, but still, I'm pretty sure I'll be capable of waiting in a car with volumetric interior protection now, even if neither the Hyundai or the Transit have this volumetric protection. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like, share and comment on this video, and make sure to subscribe to my channel as well, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram too. I shall see you in the next video, but until then, this is Josh Bacon, also known as JB the Car Fanatic, signing off. Peace!